All right, we're talking to Danny Fingeroth. Now, Danny is a good friend of Stan Lee, for one thing, and Stan passed away. We would have actually Stan Lee telling about Danny, but Stan's not here because Danny, to me, is a bigger star, but that's because I like him and he's my friend. And I know him a long time, and he's been on my radio show a lot, and the television show, too. So, A Marvelous Life is Danny Fingeroth's book about Stan Lee. I want to at least get a plug in for you. Okay, hold it like...
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah. Remember the old days we had on television when they used to sell refrigerators and Beth Meyerson would run her finger across it like this?
I'm my own best spokesmodel.
That's right.
Okay.
You're not that old to remember Beth Meyerson. She ran around with the mayor of New York.
She was Miss America.
If you sit any closer to me, what?
She was the first.
You'll be behind me?
She was the first Jewish Miss America, Joey.
Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, there you go. See, we know too much. We've been around too long, but, you know, we've served a lot of good people, and my life has been behind good people.
Yes.
And yours is too.
Well, you need good people to do anything significant. You can't, you know, they make you look good, you make them look good, but yeah, you have to be aligned with good people to get stuff done.
Yeah, and we have done good for other people.
Yes.
I mean, I was behind, well, I've been behind Wayne Newton and I would say George Lucas. I would say a lot of things.
Well, you were very generous with putting me on the air when my early books came out, and I would come to your show, and I never knew who you would throw me in the mix with in the middle of the night.
Was that before Spider-Man?
Well, Spider-Man was when I was in elementary school, so I wasn't.
No. I mean the movies, when the movies came out.
No, it was after Spider-Man, but shortly after.
What's this thing here?
That's Captain America's shield.
Is that one of yours?
It's one of Marvel's, yeah.
Yeah. So what does this guy do?
He is the living legend of World War II. He's the mainstay in all the main Marvel movies now. He's the leader of the Avengers, pretty much. Captain America is the guy who never gives up and kind of is always there when you want him in a clinch situation. He is, when the chips are down and the odds are totally against you, he manages to save the day. You know, so that's Captain America in the comics, and that's in the best of the Marvel movies. That's what they've brought across of the character too.
Who thought of that?
Two guys named Joe Simon and Jack Kirby in 1940.
Wow.
When Stan came, when Stan Lee became their assistant when he was 17 years old in 1940. So that was his very first job in comics. He had graduated high school the year before, and he had a distant relative who was the owner of the company who said the kid needs a job for a few months. And he became the assistant to these two guys, and then they left in a dispute over royalties less than a year later, and this guy Martin Goodman, who was the publisher, said, well, Stan, you're a kid, but so you take the job till we find a real grown-up.
Well, that was around the time of G.I. Joe, wasn't it? G.I. Joe and...
G.I. Joe the toys, you mean? Or G.I. Joe the movie, G.I. Joe?
The character was a cartoon. It was the same thing.
Yeah, this goes back about...
40s. In the 40s, it was around the war.
Okay.
G.I. Joe was living with... at that time, he was living with Barbie, I think.
I think you're getting some eras mixed up.
Or was...
The G.I. Joe toy came around in the 60s.
Oh.
There was a movie called G.I. Joe. I'm not sure when that came out, but that was the term that was in use for GIs, obviously.
Well, things have changed. I mean, G.I. Joe is now living with Ken.
Well,
it was Barbie. I don't know. The world's screwed. Anyway, Stan Lee. All right, now, my wife is a hygienist. My ex-wife.
Yes.
You know, I live with my ex-wife. You know.
There's a lot of that going around.
It's karma. So a karma book.
Right.
So anyway, she cleans the teeth of one of these older guys.
Okay.
He's a 90-something-year-old guy. You know who he is? Down in Florida.
And Alan Bellman, maybe.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I met him. And he was going to come and do the show, but he didn't. He don't want to come to New York. You know.
Okay.
He said quite enough.
Alan was in Rhode Island last week, so.
Well, he said he does the Comic Cons.
That must be Alan Bellman. Yeah. Alan has a book out too, about his time working at Marvel.
He's nice, you know. I mean, he's a real nice guy.
Yeah,
it was fun. We sat down and we talked for a long time. Although he had all these tools in his mouth, I didn't understand anything he said. But I had the gas, so it was fine.
So does your ex-wife work for a particular dentist?
Well, she works independently. You know, she was a golfer, and she was on the golf tour, and then but to fall back on, when you get older, you know, you got to do something else.
That's how I've heard.
Anyone tell you that?
Yeah.
You'll get there.
Yeah.
And
some of us write books when we get older.
Or become independently wealthy.
That would be good. That would be nice.
And I think what's happened to her was she was not independently wealthy. She said that I parlayed $1.5 million to 65 cents.
That was pretty good.
That was the beginning of the divorce. and you know, when you go to divorce, I don't know if you haven't had a divorce.
I have.
Oh, you have? Well, then you know what it is. It's a negotiating point.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to give in a little something.
Yeah.
So I gave her the kids. No, she didn't want that. I kept the kids.
In a cage? Or,
No. I wish I could do that now. My one daughter's growing marijuana in California.
Okay.
Where was she when I was doing drugs, you know?
Well, there you go. So she can support you now, Joe.
Any of these Marvel comic characters do drugs? Besides Kryptonite?
Well, the most famous one, the most famous substance abusing superhero is Iron Man, who is and was an alcoholic in the comics and in the movies. That was sort of his kryptonite.
Well, that was real life, you know, with Robert Downey.
Well, you know, I think that's why Downey. That's why he was the perfect guy.
Do you know how I know him?
I bet you're going to tell me.
Well, I will tell you. Well, first of all, he took Bikram yoga in L.A. And when he was taking yoga, he was on a work release program, you know.
Right.
And he had the guy who was his. I think we're in the kitchen. You can close the door, Art, anytime you want. I think we're going to be listening to, we're at Mela Ristorante in Little Italy, and the kitchen staff is just getting ready for the big luncheon.
Lunch rush.
Or either that or they're throwing knives at each other because they can't stand.
Are we getting a big meal after
we're
finish
well,
this?
you're going to eat. We're going to eat, but not what we talk. You don't want to do it now. You have lettuce on your teeth, you know. And my wife is a hygienist. So anyway, the thing I was going to tell you about with Robert Downey is I lived with Morton Downey Jr. years ago. No relation.
No relation, okay.
And I was a roommate with him.
Would have been funny if they were related.
No, it wouldn't be funny at all.
Not for them, but for us it might be a laugh riot.
Morton Downey Jr. was managed by Donald Trump at one time, you know. Let's not go into
small world after all.
It's getting smaller as the moments go on. You're sitting in the chair in Little Italy where John Gotti used to sit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why you're a little shorter than me.
Guess.
So let me finish about Robert Downey.
Okay.
So Robert Downey was in a work release program for drug and alcohol. I think it's pretty open information.
Yeah,
it's
no big secret.
Not anonymous anymore. And I was too. So I've been sober now 40 years. He came later. And he's a really good guy, incidentally, just for the sake of the conversation. Very, very nice person. But, you know, he took the yoga at Bikram, and it's great for, you know, for everything, metaphysical.
Right.
But he had to bring the other guy that was his court accompanying person had to take the yoga as well.
His sponsor.
So on the next towel, you will find his bodyguard or whatever he was, you know, the workout partner. So I was taking yoga with him for a while, and I started to realize that I think that I'm really healthy. And he was getting healthy, and later on, you know, in these years that he's doing Ironman, he's very good. I mean, he's healthy.
Yeah.
And I think he's sober and clean and healthy and become a big star again. And
well, I think he must be the highest paid star in Hollywood, right?
And it's good to see that. You know, it's good to see that someone can, when they change, even though you've had an addiction. I know I'm going to sound like Oprah, but once you have started to make that turn around, you can have another life. And I think I celebrate that with him. But isn't it ironic that he would be that character that had that problem?
I think that was part of the casting. I think when they saw we have this alcoholic superhero.
Chemical.
Yeah, a chemically dependent superhero, and Robert Downey Jr. looks like him, and you know, and could do the things that Tony Stark and Iron Man does. It was really perfect, and it's the thing that resonates with the public, where people go, oh, that's pretty clever, and it gives it multiple levels. But yeah, so Iron Man was the most substance abusing superhero, and in the movies he's still, you know, someone will offer him a drink and he'll go, no, I can't take that, or he'll relapse or something. But they use it, and it gives it an extra set of dimensions because Downey Jr. has his own background with that.
Well, Marvel is ahead of the curve because they put Wonder Woman out there before it was fashionable for women to be where they are today, you know, which is that women's movement.
Wonder Woman was DC Comics. That's the.
Is that right? Is that another?
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I don't know who's from who anymore. I can't tell.
Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman are DC Comics.
Okay.
Which is owned by Time Warner, which is owned by AT&T.
It's all, everybody's together now.
Spider-Man, the Hulk, the X-Men, the Fantastic Four, the Avengers, Thor, they're owned by Marvel, which is owned by Disney. But all the Marvel characters were co-created by Stan Lee, who I've written the book about.
Oh, so what's the story? Why would you want to write about Stan Lee instead of yourself?
Well, there's some of me in there too, because I worked with Stan and knew him over a course of 40 years. I wasn't his closest friend, but I was a close colleague and did a lot of events in public with him, things like this, on convention stages for thousands of people. Stan is the most well-known comic book creator ever. There's nobody who even comes close second, and is part of a generation of people who created the early comics and the early superheroes, both in the 40s and again in the 60s. So he had a career that was like a lot of greatest generation, you know, lived through the Depression, served in World War II, had the same origin as a lot of people I knew and was related to, and yet, of course, carved this special niche for himself as being, you know, the person who told the stories in the comics, who with his creative partners, Jack Kirby and Steve Ditko and other artists, because Stan did not draw. Stan was a writer, editor, art director, publicist, you know, promotional genius, charismatic guy, inspiration, but he needed artists to tell those stories.
As did Walt Disney, who now owns his company. But Disney was the animator king of all animated film.
And Stan's goal had always been to make Marvel sort of like Disney, so it's interesting that Marvel is now owned by Disney. Yeah. So Stan was this representative of a generation of people who created these pop culture icons we all know, and he had different sides. Everybody knows the charming, funny old guy from the cameos in the movies, but Stan was also a creative force. He was a media executive. You know, there was a lot of controversy over the years about who did what when, and who should get credit, and who should get money, and who should get attention, and so there's, you know, his life, and even up until the end of his life, when he had all that weird stuff happening in his last couple of years after his wife and his lawyer died, and people were taking advantage of him. I mean, it's a horribly sad story, but a gripping one. And, you know, I like to say, just like Stan, for a couple of generations of kids, was the hip uncle who understood your love of comics and superheroes, you know, or the you know, aware parent who kind of got what you were into. Well, when he became elderly, he kind of became, for the boomer generation, this kind of symbolic, what do we do with Pop? You know, because he was kind of, you put him on stage and he was great.
Well, he became a comic book character.
He wasn't a lot of comics, you know. If you put him on a set with you and me like this, he'd be brilliant. He'd be funny. His memory would be great. He'd have great stories. He'd have wisecracks. He'd be far more interesting than I am.
No, that's not true. Well, so I'm not going to let you get away with that one. So he started Comic-Con? Did he start that?
No, that was started. Comic-Con was started by.
Don't say DC.
No, by fans. Comic-Con. You know, the biggest Comic-Con, the San Diego Comic-Con, and it's the most famous one, started as 300 fans getting together really to trade comic books in 1970 in a room, you know, maybe this big in a hotel in San Diego. There have been many other comic book conventions, and before that, science fiction conventions. But yeah, what you think of as the San Diego Con or the New York Con was started by dedicated fans, and then some comic dealers, and then they would invite artists. And I think that first one had this guy, Jack Kirby, there, who was living in California. Yeah. And he was, you know, among, you know, it's not a name that's widely known, but you know, the look and feel of pretty much everything Marvel except Spider-Man and Doctor Strange. So the look and feel that what we think of as Hulk and Avengers and even Captain America and Iron Man, all that goes back to Jack Kirby.
San Diego is also the place where Jersey Boys began, you know.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, that was their first, where they realized they had a show that could go to Broadway.
Right.
And my friend Shotgun Tom Kelly, do you know him?
What's his name?
He's got a star in the sidewalk. Yeah, he's legendary. He's a comic book character himself.
Okay.
So anyway, we have a lot in common here, you and I, because we both have been behind these people. I started out the conversation with that. And we've been behind a lot of money-making people, and they've made out very damn well.
Thanks to us, Joey.
And what the hell happened to us? Where did we go wrong here? Why are we not rich and famous? What happened? What did we do wrong?
We didn't have ruthless enough lawyers.
Oh, so, you know, we graduated too many lawyers. You can't do anything about that one.
No, but what can you do? But no, it's you're right. We and many people like us, you know, there's no, you know, just like there's no such thing as an overnight success. Every overnight success works.
Except that was when my show was on.
Well, that's...
And it was a success. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I hate that expression.
You know, there's also no such thing as somebody who does it all alone. You know, everybody who accomplishes something has, starting very often with their parents, either because of them or in spite of them, you know, goes on to do interesting, famous, and often money-making things. So yeah, that's.
Well,
without us, Joey, nothing would happen.
Well, I grew up in a poor neighborhood, you know.
How poor was it, Joey?
It was so poor. I'm from Buffalo. Why can't I be from normal parents? I know. So right next door to me was a kid that lived upstairs, and we were downstairs. We were in like a $30 a month flat, you know, in those days. And he used to take a rope and put his comic books down, and we would trade comics that way because we weren't allowed to. We weren't supposed to be doing that. I put a comic book in my homework. You know, we've all done this, I think. The social studies book, what used to be called geography.
Right.
Now we don't know where anything is anymore, so we don't call it geography. So you got to go listen to Flash Phelps on XM to find out where the hell we're going.
I'll make a note of that. Okay.
Anyway, on this little platform called the Toilet, where I would do most of my Marvel comic reading.
It's one of the major media platforms.
It was a great place to learn. I also had Classic Comics. Who owned that one?
I think that, you know, it might have been, the company might have been called Classic Comics.
Oh, but they had, Disney had Treasure Island. I remember I read that comic book.
Right, well, there were other people who adapted classic literature, but Classic Comics was a brand. So you knew that everything they did would be an adaptation.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of, I can't remember where I made a turn where I didn't like to see comics anymore. You know, there's an age, I think.
Yeah, that's pretty common.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Is it still that way, or is it an adult medium anymore?
Well, it's a little complicated. The stuff that you think of as the comic book from, say, my childhood, or maybe yours, was 10 cents or 12 cents.
Yeah.
That's now $3.99.
Oh.
And the audience for that, oddly enough, is mostly like adults 40 and over who can afford that and who kind of, you know, and like getting their superhero adventures in that kind of delivery system, or a version of it online. So the same characters that, you know, literally billions of people love in the movies and whose adventures came from the comics, those comics are a specialty market. What's big now is, of course, there's these fine art, independent comics, but the biggest thing is comics for young adults, for kids and young teens, and probably the most famous and successful is a woman named Raina Telgemeier, who does graphic novels for young adults for Scholastic, and she is the most popular graphic novelist in the country, if not the world. And nobody's heard of her because she does stuff for kids.
Where's she from?
Right, you know, America, you know.
Oh.
Boston or Buffalo, I forget
America's
exactly.
a big country, you know.
She's like, you know, but she's just a regular.
She's not from Buffalo, can't be.
Some people from Buffalo.
No, she's too successful.
Okay, all right.
You know, this other thing I was just thinking about, this germ of an idea, is that I used to read Dick Tracy in the comic book. Now we got one of his watches, but it's called an apple.
An apple.
You know, I mean, we used to. This in the shoe that Don Adams talked into. Remember that? I mean,
those are coming.
This is a comic book thing. But is there another comic book fantasy that we haven't Do we have any of those yet besides World Peace?
Well, I guess time travel.
Yeah.
You know, as far as I know, we're not still doing that.
Well, Richard Grass is working on it.
Okay, time travel, teleportation. I think those are the, actual flying. You know, single flights. I think those fantasies are still there. You know what Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, Steve Ditko, what the Marvel people did was they took those superhuman fantasies and superpower, colorful characters, and grafted onto them regular people's problems, so that the problem wasn't just kryptonite, or whatever a character would be vulnerable with, but, Spider-Man, his guilt and over letting his uncle get killed, the Hulk sort of embodies rage. So they took the colorful characters, and instead of the stories just being kind of simple, plot-driven, we go from plot point A to plot B, and here's the villain's plan, that was less important than the angst and the guilt or the joy or whatever the characters felt over what they were doing or couldn't do, or what the villains were doing. It became...
It's fantasy.
Fantasy mixed with soap opera.
Yeah, like right now, it would have to have Mother Teresa meeting the Transformer.
Exactly. You joke,
that would work.
That was exactly. Or Mother Teresa becoming a Transformer.
That's it, right. And, there's another line here, I'm not going to touch it. But it went right through my head. And that's probably what Stan Lee did, is it went through his head and then he put it on paper.
Yeah, exactly.
Was he an artist too?
He was not. I've seen him doodle. He's actually, he was a competent caricaturist.
How about you?
I'm a competent doodler a little. Everybody who works in comics, because it's something that hits you as a kid, comes into it wanting to draw, I think, because the idea when you're 5, 6, 7, 8, that somebody writes or edits, what does that even mean to a kid, these things, is very abstract, but the idea that somebody drew it, you can understand and sit down with a piece of paper and draw it. So yeah, everybody comes in wanting to, and then you go, at least, I went, well, I'll never be, I can draw well enough to amuse myself and my friends, but not for someone to pay me to publish it. And then you sort of realize, but there's other ways to tell a story in comic book form. You can write them, you can be an editor, which in comics editor is more like a producer or a showrunner in TV or a movie. So it's not just, it's not just finding spelling errors, it's being involved in the creative process in a different way. So
Art Volo, who's doing our shooting here today, he's a very wonderful artist. He can imitate anybody's handwriting. So he could be a forger, And I'm going to ask him to show you a signature.
Okay.
If we can get a piece of paper and a pen, and come over here and show us this art. You got to do this. You don't want to be on this thing. You got to do this. You have to show us this thing. It's too much of a setup. Yeah, he can take the flip side of a placemat, which is usually blank, except in bad restaurants.
Right.
And he will take a magic marker, and he could do Walt Disney's signature exactly, but he'll do Walter Lantz, who's another comic book guy, and then he will do yours.
Okay. And that's not a check. Okay?
Make you crazy because you'll say, no wonder why we have people who are in jail. Art belongs in jail.
Well, what a lot of people do, who like Stan and to a lesser degree me, who, when people want autographs, and you probably, I don't know if you do this too, but I have a different signature for my autograph than I do for when I write a check.
Really?
Because I figured out at one point, when I was sitting, years ago, I went, I'm giving these people the same signature that I put on my checks. Maybe that's not a good idea.
No, that's well, I just use another name.
That's another story.
That's another story.
Joey's in witness protection right now, and it's very nice to come out and do
to be honest about it, one time I signed Dick Clark's name in L.A. and we had lunch. Not with Dick.
No, okay. And did it go through?
And they took it.
There you go.
No credit card in those days. Now, I want to ask you something else here. What do you think is your best contribution in all the years of Marvel Comics? And because we're friends, and I never really asked you this in all the times that we've spent together.
Cow.
What do you think is the biggest contribution you've made, or you get the most? I'm going to give you time to think. Or the most joy out of something that you contributed that you said, wow, or maybe even got passed by on. I mean, there's a certain section of us that has things that we don't tell people.
Well, I always felt there was kind of a surreal and interesting privilege, they paid me for it, to write and edit comics for Marvel, that there was this Marvel universe that I got to be a part of, and that any story I wrote, or contributed to as an editor, or good, bad, or indifferent, was now part of that. And someone 20 years from then would have to deal with it, even if they ignored it. You know what I mean? There would be people out there going, they ignored that story Danny wrote. You know, I loved working with artists and with other artists and other writers, putting things together. In some ways, I think, not just to plug the book, but I think the Stan Lee A Marvelous Life biography is it's the thing that's on my mind right now, and the thing that I'm proudest of, because I think people who've read it, both people in the business and outside the business, think that I've achieved what I set out to, which was and which is to tell a fair and true story of a guy who was more controversial than most people know, who survived as a creative force and as a media executive for 75 years.
But your own story is also interesting, because you have been behind the scenes doing that same thing. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah, I get what you're saying.
But it's not time yet.
I think I have a fascinating story,
Yeah.
but I don't know if most people would. I'm a native New Yorker. I had my father was a famous cantor.
Was he?
He was the cantor at the Nevele Hotel.
Oh, wow.
Back in the day, so he was,
That was up in the Catskills.
Right, right, and just like those hotels would advertise who the comedians and the singers were during the rest of the year, on the Jewish holidays, they would compete for who had the best cantors, and my dad was one of those guys.
Wonderful.
So he had this odd kind of, he was a celebrity in this very narrow niche, not unlike myself.
Like yourself. Now, I want to say something else. There's no pictures in this book.
There are you have the galley there. Oh. There are pictures in the actual book, and they're pictures that, in my contract I signed a clause that said author will provide, X number of pictures, and I didn't think about it, and then I had to find them. And I wanted to find unusual stuff, not for various copyright reasons, I didn't want to use any Marvel images. So I had to really hustle and improvise, and I found photos of Stan over the years that I don't think anybody else has, or if they do, it's maybe been seen on somebody's Facebook page. Now, I mean, there are photos in there that you're not going to see anywhere else. I think that's part of the appeal.
Well, there's also a character that you missed, which would be probably someone that they would do a series on with Larry, what's his name? How can I forget his name?
Okay.
Larry,
Stan's brother?
No, Larry, what's his name in California, who does a series on HBO? Larry David.
Oh.
Wow.
Okay.
I had to go way back in my library for that.
Okay.
But he was a Hasidic Jew with payas, and he was driving a motorcycle. He was called the Matzoids.
Well, I think that might have been a routine he was doing. I don't know if that was actually.
Boy, I had to struggle for that.
Yeah.
Wow.
But it was worth it. You got there, Joey.
So, no editing.
Maybe a little editing.
It's organic.
Maybe
Danny,
not so organic.
Danny, you're great. You're great. I love you.
Right
You're
back at you,
person.
Joey.
And I hope that everybody reads A
here.
Marvelous Life, and Danny is having one. Danny Fingeroth, and you can get it brand new. Stan Lee story.
Just was published on November 5th.
What a good time. Thank you for coming here to see
pleasure.
me in Little Italy.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, because now we're going to have to loan you some money and then break your legs.
These are the risks you take being an author.
It's a Reynolds Rap.
All right. Thank you.